Hi, we're going to be working on problem 2 of practice exam 2 in preparation for exam 1 of fall 2025. This problem asks us to find a logically equivalent expression to the output of this truth table, which is W. And there are many ways to go about this. The most tedious and perhaps least efficient way would be going through each of our answer choices and seeing if it matches up with the truth table. Instead, what we can do is we can consider examples or rows from the truth table and see if they match up with the answer choices. So to start off with a really basic case, let's just look at the first row of the truth table, in which all of our inputs, P, Q, R, are true, and our output is false. So looking at this, immediately I see answer choice B, and I know that answer choice B, when P and R are true, is always going to equate to true. So, and this is because P if and only if R is going to be equivalent to P if P then R, and if R then P. In this case, P and R are both going to be true. So we have true implies true and true implies true again. Both of these are going to evaluate to true. And so as a result, we have true and true, and the output should be true. However, if we look at the first row over here, that's going to be false. So we can cross this out. Another example that we can consider for this specific row is E. In this, we have not P or R, and so we know that R is going to be true in this row of the truth table, and so this expression should evaluate to true no matter what. Not P is going to be equivalent to false because it's not true. False, or like we said earlier, R is going to be true, so false or true should be equivalent to true. However, in the first row, that is going to, or the result of the logical expression should be false. And so we know that this is not the one. Next, we can look at D, and I'm just kind of going arbitrarily here as I would on an exam. P and not Q and R. So in our first row, we have true and not Q, in this case, is going to be false. So true and false, and true is going to be equivalent to false. So that part checks out, but let's try another example because I'm not convinced yet. Let's look at this row, true, false, and true. And the reason that I chose this row to look at and consider for this answer choice is because it's evident that Q is going to be false while P and R are both true, and we are negating the value of Q over here. So we know that we should get a true value for this expression. However, instead we get false over here, so we know that D is not going to work. To recap, if we look at this specific row, which I'm going to call row 3 is here, we have true and not false, which is going to be true, and true, so this should be equivalent to true. However, we have a value of false over here. Okay, the next example that I'm going to consider is A, because I don't like dealing with implied statements and it's kind of difficult to think about and directly evaluate for a truth table. So A says not R or Q and P. So let's try to find an example in the table in which Q and P are both going to be true. So we want this to evaluate to true. And see what the behavior of the truth table is based on different inputs of R. So if we look at row 2, we have a situation in which P and Q are both true and R is false. So our value is going to be not R, which is going to be true. We have true, or Q and P is going to be true and true, which just evaluates to true. So it's going to be true true or true, which is going to be just true again. And we see that the output here is actually false. So we know that this does not work. We've successfully eliminated all of the options except for one with C. Just for good measure, we can double check that C works if we have time on the exam, but since we've eliminated all of the other options, we know that our final choice is going to be C.